So hello everybody. Welcome to Storytelling Night, the second one ever. I am so happy to be back here with all of you again. So my name is Hetty, as most of you know, and I will be your hostess for the evening. We have an incredible lineup of storytellers tonight, and I'm beyond excited to get things rolling. Before we begin, a few technical things and some short announcements. So you may have heard me already chatting with some of the people, but if you're a listener, you can set your screen up to speaker mode. So that way you're only seeing the person speaking. Of course, you're welcome to be in gallery mode if you prefer. Storytellers will probably have their screen on gallery view so that they can see all your beautiful faces listening. Everyone is muted except for the speaker. And a huge part of storytelling is, of course, the audience, because what is a story without a listener? If you have your camera on, do your best to be present with the speaker. And even though your laughter, sighs, and claps and tears may not be heard, they will surely be seen, which is very helpful for the person telling the story. Before we begin the stories, I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Reflections, our very special online venue that is hosting us here tonight. Reflections Online is a community hub for all bodies at all ages. We offer movement and yoga classes, workshops, events like this one, and wellness products, and it's all online. Reflections caters to the more mature body and mind and strives to make every offering accessible, safe, and fun. Whether you are starting a movement practice or resuming one after time off, we are here to welcome you just as you are. And you will surely be able to find something that is right for you. Reflections is home to signature classes such as Bare Bones Basics Yoga, Yoga for Strong Bones, Senior Movement in the house, and Rhythm and Balance. If you are interested in checking out our offerings or receiving a free trial class, reach out to us by going to our website, reflectionsyoga.com, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram to see all that we have to offer. Now, back to storytelling. We have 10 phenomenal speakers and stories tonight, and I had the honor of speaking with each person prior to the event. The theme of the night, as most of you know, is Adventures on Earth, stories of travel, journeys, and voyages. This topic struck me like a lightning bolt. Maybe it's because humanity is going through an incredible hardship together. And traveling for me has always made me feel so connected to the world. Exploring the earth is an extraordinary experience. Those of us who are fortunate enough to take voyages around the globe get to see life on this planet from a much broader perspective. Our eyes are opened, our minds are expanded, and we connect to people of all cultures who are beautifully different, yet so similar in all the important ways. It is said that magic and mystery lies on the edge, just outside the comfort zone. And this to me is what travel holds, magic and mystery. Oh, how I miss it. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Raised in Roslyn, New York, and currently living in Queens, she is retired. She actually just retired at the beginning of 2020 and finds great joy in gardening, reading, and spending time with her family. She really appreciates the little things in life, like cool breezes and biscotti dipped in coffee. I know these tiny details about her because she is my very own amazing mother, Lynn Yankelevich. She is a proud mama of 2 and grandma of 4. Tonight she will share an extra special story that changed the course of her life. If it were not for this journey, I wouldn't be here. So I'm forever grateful that she took this trip. Lynn, mama, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Hetty. That was a beautiful introduction. My trip to Israel in 1971 did change my life. I was living in Boston after graduating Boston University, and with the ongoing Vietnam War, I was having a very difficult time finding a decent teaching job. Having never traveled to Europe or a Middle Eastern country, my college girlfriend Carol found out about a volunteer program to Israel called Shirut La'am, Service to the People. This program included living in a school called an Ulpan for 3 months to learn Hebrew, then placement in a small town to teach English for 9 months. 100 Americans and 5 people from Argentina. That was the group. We arrived in Tel Aviv and went directly to the Ulpan in a town called Kiryat Shmona in northern Israel. When we met as one large group, there were many post-Vietnam hippies from the USA. Lots of cut-off jeans with patches, tie-dye t-shirts, and young women with long hair parted in the middle, including myself, of course. However, off by himself was someone quite different. He was wearing gabardine slacks, a purple ironed button-down shirt, and beads around his neck. So handsome. Nothing like the American hippies. His name was Mario, one of the Argentines. Don't ask how I connected with this man who barely knew any English, and my Spanish was high school 2 years only, but we did connect. In between studying, we got to travel to wonderful local areas in Israel and schedule trips throughout the country. Just as we were going to be placed in towns to teach, late one night a phone call was received in the office of the Ulpan. One of my friends came knocking on my door. I had a call from New York. I ran to take the call. It was my brother-in-law. My father, Harry, died, a heart attack at 58. My heart stopped, and I still remember how I sobbed and screamed. We were very close, and he was proud of me and my trip to Israel. How I want to share my experiences from Israel with him. I wasn't able to arrive back home in time for the funeral, but I did spend time with my mother, Shirley, my sister, Paula, and family during the week of mourning Shiva. My mother was a young widow of 55, and I wanted to stay home to help her. I clearly remember what she said to me, and those words changed my life. She said, "Daddy would have wanted you to finish the program in Israel. I will be fine." It was so difficult to leave my mother, but I did. I returned to Israel. My adventures were just beginning. I taught young children English in a town called Beit Shan for 9 months. On weekends, trips to Haifa, the ins and outs of the old city of Jerusalem, Bethlehem, excavations of old artifacts in Jericho, and much more, all with Mario. Yes, we reconnected, and coincidentally, Mario's special Argentine aunt and uncle lived on a kibbutz in Beit Shan, where I was living. We spent many memorable times with them and family. In the end, we traveled to Rome, Florence, Paris, and then back to New York for Mario to meet my mother, Shirley. Mario and I fell in love. Our decision came quickly to marry. If my mother had not insisted that I return to Israel, my life that I have now would not have existed. 2 incredible children, David and Hetty, 4 amazing grandchildren, and my closest friends that I met on the trip, Ina and Jim, who are on this call tonight, and Jim was waiting for Ina back in New York. My girlfriend, Carol, who discovered this trip, and her husband, Ira, who she also met on the program and married. There was also Eddie, who was also on this call, one of the Argentines on the program, who is Mario's childhood friend and mine, plus an entire family, friends, including Ines, who is also a storyteller on this call, and a new culture in Argentina, everything in Spanish, and not to forget the amazing food. This is a trip I will never forget. I thought I would share with you this photo of hippie Lynn and Mario, which I did send home to my parents prior to my father's death. So at least my dad saw this photo of Mario and how happy his daughter Linny was. So if you can see it, there we are back in it was probably 1972. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yay, Mom. I love that story so much.
Oh, Linny!
You know, I never met my grandfather, and we have a cut of his plant in our apartment. We call it the Harry plant. So that is a very special, and it's in River's room, very special plant to us. Thank you for sharing. Sorry, I just had some tears in my eyes and I need to breathe away for a moment. So thank you for sharing that story. All right, everybody. Anne Whitehouse was raised in Alabama and currently splits her time between New York City and Columbia County. She is a published poet, writer of fiction and nonfiction, and her most recently published poetry collection is called Outside from the Inside. I also happen to know she is an anatomy nerd like me because we met years ago in an advanced anatomy course. Tonight, she shares a story about the good, the bad, and the ugly from her honeymoon to Ireland 41 years ago. Anne, the mic is yours. Okay, so make sure you unmute yourself.
I did. Well, thank you so much. And actually, there are quite a few poems about anatomy in my new poetry collection. So I have a website, which is my name if you guys are interested. When Hetty told me that her husband was from Ireland and she asked me to participate, I said, well, you know, I went to Ireland on my honeymoon. So I told her I would tell a story about my Irish honeymoon. Growing up in Alabama, I didn't know any Irish people. My connection to Ireland came through Irish literature. Not until I was in college did I meet an Irishman when I had a student job as a part-time security guard at the Fogg Art Museum. With a friend, I worked on weekend afternoons along with Harvard retirees who were picking up some extra cash. Frank was one of them, an Irishman of about 70 with a pink seamless face and blue inscrutable eyes. He liked to carry a pack of playing cards and a counterfeit bill decorated with pictures of naked ladies that he tried to shock us with. He gestured with us to come with him to an unobserved corner. While he stared at his pictures in wonderment, we smothered giggles. He had a way of saying drolly, "It could be worse. It could be worse. I could have been born twins, and then there'd be two of me." My husband and I met in college. We shared a love of Irish literature. For our honeymoon, we traveled to Ireland. We rented a car and spent 3 weeks in August 1979 circumnavigating the country. We visited Joyce's Martello Tower outside of Dublin and Yeats's Square Tower, Thor Balali, outside of Gort in Galway. While we didn't visit the Aran Islands, we looked at them from the shore and thought of John Millington Synge. We saw plays at the Abbey Theatre and the Dublin Gate. We viewed the Book of Kells on display at Trinity College. We walked through Phoenix Park and St. Stephen's Green in Dublin and visited gardens and castles throughout the countryside. Powers Court, Anne's Grove, Mount Usher, Kilkenny, Glendalough. We went around the Ring of Kerry and the Dingle Peninsula. We stood on the cliffs of Moher and drove through the desolate stony Burren with its dolmens. After seeing Lady Gregory's cool park with the famous beech tree where Yeats and the other members of the Irish Renaissance carved their names, we ate lunch at a pub in Clifton, Connemara. Other diners that day included a group of English tourists on a fishing vacation. While we were eating, the news came on the radio that Lord Mountbatten, a prominent member of the British royal family and World War II hero, had been blown up on a fishing boat off the west coast of Ireland by an IRA bomb just a 3 hours drive from where we were sitting. Hearing the news, the English sat in shock. "Yes, 'tis a pity, 'tisn't it?" remarked the Irish proprietor. The day we visited the Irish National Stud and Japanese Gardens, we picked up an old man in front of the entrance gate who was hitchhiking and gave him a lift. Oh, he was proud to sit up front. Because I obligingly moved to the back seat of our Mini to give him the more comfortable seat. He was proud to sit up front. Every time we passed a pedestrian or other motorist, he tapped his forefinger on his forehead in the gesture that Irish drivers use to acknowledge each other. As we passed the entry gate, our passenger remarked how the guard there had an ideal job. All he has to do all day is sit up there and let people in, and he gets a comfortable house to live in. He told us his name was Mr. Roach. We agreed to meet him later and take him home. On the drive back, he asked us to come in for tea, and we accepted. The bareness of his house was a shock. There was almost no furniture, except for a folding table and chairs. Although he had invited us for tea, there was no food in the house. He boiled water and he had some coarse tea bags and no milk. Out of a chest, he took a box of stale, tasteless biscuits. That was all he had to eat. Like every Irishman we met, Mr. Roach had family in America. He told us about how when he went to visit his daughter in Chicago, he gave the key to his house to his neighbor and asked her to look after it for him. After a visit of several months, he returned to discover that his neighbor had sold the house in his absence. Although he managed to get his house back after much effort, everything was gone. Mr. Roach's story made us realize that the plays of Brian Friel, Martin McDonough, Brendan Behan, Tom Murphy, Owen McCafferty, and the others are not fanciful exaggerations, but realistic portrayals of life in Ireland. Irish humor has a dark twist. There is bleakness as well as beauty in its countryside and its cities. Its history is one of terror, conquest, and usurpation. Stories of famine and fratricide are part of its national consciousness. Yet its standards of literacy and education are among the highest in Europe, higher than in the United Kingdom, and the greatness of its literature is indisputable. Memories of our honeymoon in Ireland remain vivid, and Ireland continues to exert its fascination on me. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Wow. So you're one of the stories that I hadn't heard before. I know a lot of the storytellers, so that's wild. And I've been to so many of the places that you mentioned because my husband sitting in the other room is from New York. We walked in Cool Park many, many times. Thorvald, Dingle, all the places.
Yeah, it's a beautiful country, but there's a darkness there. You feel it, and we experienced it too.
Yeah, that's right. Why all the best writers and poets there, there's a lot of depth there from, the history is deep. So anyway, thank you for sharing your story.
Well, thank you so much for listening.
Oh, and yeah, let me just meet you, but I did want to tell everyone who's on the call tonight that Anne is also going to be sharing at a poetry reading on October 10th. And you can always go to her website, annewhitehouse.com, for more information. Okay, so moving on to our next storyteller. Carol Shep is our other Southern gal speaking tonight. She is a mother of 2 and currently resides in New York City. Her and her husband also have a farm in Virginia where she was raised. She is a retired lawyer and a crossword fanatic, like me. And her goal in retirement was to get healthier, which is how she found Reflections. And I'm so happy she did. Tonight, Carol takes us back to Virginia and shares a fascinating little tale about how small the world really is. Carol, the mic is yours. Let's see, where are you, Carol?
Hi, as Hetty said, I'm Carol Sue Robinson Shep, and this is my story, but I think I'll preface it with after Anne's, I just can't wait to travel again and go to Ireland. Darkness and all. So, about 80 years ago, my mother, Estelle Good, lived in Brooklyn. She was 15 and about to go to college. With the war on the horizon, my grandfather decided to send her to Madison College, then a small all-girls teachers college in the Shenandoah Valley in Northwest Virginia. Now it's James Madison University, which people might actually have heard of. But he thought she would be safe there. Suffice it to say, there were just a handful of other Jewish women in Madison, and they were a very close-knit group. Now, there was a small rural town nearby in the Shenandoah Valley, Luray, about 4,000 people then and now. You might have heard of the Luray Caverns. It's a tourist attraction in the town. As was fairly common in the South, the Jewish family in the town ran the general store. And that family was my dad's. He had grown up there. He'd gone to UVA, and as luck would have it, my dad met my mom, they married, and they lived in this small town in Virginia. Though he had promised her she would never have to live there, he always said that was a campaign promise. And she always felt like an alien in this small, rural, and need I say, extremely conservative town in Luray. So I was born and grew up in Luray. Fast forward, I went to college at Brown only because back then the University of Virginia did not take women yet. So I had to find someplace else to go. After Brown, I went to Harvard Law School. I started practicing corporate law. I moved to New York. I married. I had kids. And because of my earlier life, upbringing, whatever, my husband would say I had two personas. Carol Sue, who oozed Southern charm, and Carol, who was the New York lawyer. I kind of preferred to think of it as sort of a iron fist and velvet glove, but just a difference in perspective. So on one of our trips to Virginia with the kids about 25 years ago, we headed to Colonial Williamsburg, which is on the other side of the state from Luray. And we got there with the kids and we're at the visitor center. And this woman is staring at me. She's not just staring at me. She's like absolutely fixated the way she's looking at me. It was like really creepy. And I forgot I was in Virginia. And so in my more New York lawyer mode, I said to her, "May I help you?" And she responded very almost meekly, "You look exactly like a college friend of mine, but she would be so much older than you." And at that point, I felt really bad. So I sort of flipped into my more, I would say, charming thing. And I said, "Oh, who might that be?" And she said, "Estelle Good." And I said, "Oh, well, that's because she's my mother." And at the time, I was totally freaked out because, I had become my mother. But then the memory of that day has been like etched in my brain, and gradually and imperceptibly that freak out memory transformed into like a cherished connection with my mother. And I just think of it as like from one generation to the next. L'adore, l'adore.
Oh my goodness, Carol, thank you for sharing that. I think that's a realization that we all come to at some point or another, that we are our mothers. So it is, hopefully a wonderful thing. And I really appreciate.
Well, it just took a while for it to turn into a wonderful memory. That's all.
Yes. And you will have that forever to take with you. So thank you for sharing. Really, really interesting.
Thank you for letting me share.
Of course. Okay, so we continue on. Yes, okay, so when I spoke to our next storyteller, I was mostly taken aback by how much hardship she has overcome in her life. I met Nicole also at Reflections a few years back when she was searching for a place of community and healing. I think she could have earned an award for best attendance in our yoga classes. Born and raised in Bayside, Queens, and currently living in New York City, she really didn't have to travel too far to experience something profound. She shares a story about a ride on the Lexington Avenue 6 train with her son Brian, when he was just a young boy. Nicole, the mic is yours. Where are you, Nicole?
Okay, you can hear me now, right?
Yes.
Okay. The story is called I Need to Know. There was one thing I knew when I went outside with my son. Someone would invariably come up to him and ask the question. The question was, what's on your leg? My son wore leg braces, orthotics, plastic-covered splints that went up to his kneecaps. The orthotics, as doctors would say, would help him walk better, make him not tiptoe, and stop him from pronating his feet. He went everywhere with them, and at nighttime he got a reprieve from his orthotics and would take them off and put on his night braces. My son also went to physical therapy twice a week, occupational therapy twice a week, and speech. In addition to this, he wore thick glasses and a Teflon bodysuit so that his spine would be kept in the correct position. As the doctor would say, we need to monitor him, make sure he doesn't get scoliosis. When my son was 2 years old, he was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, spastic diplegia. He was able to walk, but he had a spastic muscle problems in his torso and legs that made his balance and gait problems. His coordination was off, and he looked like the scarecrow in the Wizard of Oz. Every day after work, I'd bring him to his therapy, which meant taking a bus, subway, and a walk to therapy offices that were scattered throughout New York City. That brings me to the question, whenever we went, someone always wanted to know and felt the need to ask us what's on his leg. Why is he wearing that? And my personal favorite, what's wrong with him? Why does he walk like that? Which I wanted to ask, what's wrong with you? Why would you ask that question in front of a child? Why people felt the need to ask him about his orthotics was beyond me. Was this if it was going to be an SAT question? Well, that brings me to the day I had enough. I was exhausted. I was hungry with a throbbing headache. I was just bringing my son back from physical therapy. It was cold and I hadn't eaten and I just wanted to get home. And then I heard it, the question, excuse me, miss, excuse me, miss. When I asked you a question, I quickly hurried my son down the steps and through the turnstile to the subway, to Lexington Uptown number 6. I heard it again, much louder this time, much more demanding. Excuse me, miss, excuse me. I pulled my son close to me and quickly walked down the steps to the platform, and there it was again. Excuse me, miss, excuse me. I was at the end of the platform now, nowhere to go. I looked up and saw a tall, well-dressed woman with a cashmere coat, Coach bag, and expensive wristwatch. She looked and acted like somebody's boss lady from Park Avenue, with blonde highlights and pearl earrings. She looked directly at me and demanded, excuse me, I want to ask you something. I looked up at this well-dressed woman with this angry look on her face, and I said, no, please don't ask me questions. Don't ask me any questions. I said this with a low, controlled voice. My throat was dry, I was hungry, and I had a pounding headache. Well, I need to ask you this question, she continued, and I'm being nice. Being nice, I need to know, and I'm just being nice. I looked up at the woman, hoping it wasn't what I thought. Maybe this woman in my personal space wanted directions. Maybe she was lost. Well, what is it, I asked. Well, she said, I need to know. I'm just asking what's on his legs. Why is he wearing them? Why does he walk like that? I'm being nice, she went on. I felt my cheeks turning red and my throat was scratchy and dry. I could feel a pounding headache. I was mad at myself for thinking maybe she wanted directions. I should have known better. I'd been tricked. I felt like a fool. It was always the same question. I turned to this woman and I said, can I ask you a question? Yes, what is it, she asked. Well, I need to know, and I'm being nice. Do you have a yeast infection? I repeated again much louder. Do you have a yeast infection? I need to know, and I'm being nice. The woman looked at me strangely. Just then the number 6 Lexington line came, and I pulled my son into the car. You know, I said to my son, some people will tell you that it's your job to educate people and tell them what's on your leg. Educate them about cerebral palsy. Well, I'm not like most mothers. You can tell them you have cerebral palsy and about why you wear leg braces, or you can tell them to leave me alone. Do you understand that? I looked at my little son. Sure, Mommy, he said, put his 4-year-old blonde curly head on my shoulders, and promptly fell asleep.
God. Nicole, you never cease to bring me to tears. She told me that story.
Oh, that's
Hold on, let me just, thank you so much for sharing that. It is really just, I mean, the lesson that we can all take from that is really big. So thank you so much for sharing that. We have some people chatting in that they're crying. So, and I just want to share with you all that Nicole's son Brian is now a public speaker, a disability advocate and activist, a journalist. He works for Microsoft, and he was one of Forbes's 30 under 30 most impressive people in the country. So I think you did an amazing job with your son. We're all very proud of you. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, deep breaths. So let's see, we are up to speaker number 5. Paula Marmon. I saw that you had a little video glitch, but you're back. Paula Marmon is not only our next storyteller, but also my fabulous aunt, Lynn's sister. And I just have to share this memory, Paula. We didn't talk about this, but one of my favorite memories of you was staying in your Hell's Kitchen apartment sometime in the 1980s, very safe neighborhood, and going on auditions with you as you pursued your acting career. And you would always wear a beret, and I was totally captivated by your coolness. And I'm glad you don't smoke cigarettes anymore. I know, it just seemed so normal back then. So in Paula's retirement, she's become an avid traveler and has made it a mission to explore the globe. Alaska, Kenya, Scotland, and Wales, just to name a few places she has recently been. However, this story takes place in 1991 and by far was the most significant journey she will have ever taken. Paula, the mic is yours.
Thank you. I've never considered myself brave or daring. I'll start out that way, nor am I a chance taker. I swim in the shallow end of the pool. No skydiving for me, no. I have though done some traveling. But this particular trip.
Hey Paula, sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt you. The Wi-Fi maybe is a little shaky.
Oh, is it? Ooh.
Yeah, can you be any closer? Or if you have to shut off your video, maybe that will actually help with the sound. I just want your story to be heard.
How is it now? Is it better now?
I think so, yes. Okay, start from the beginning.
Okay, I've never considered myself brave or daring. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Nor am I a chance taker. I swim in the shallow end of the pool. No skydiving for me. I've done some traveling though, but this particular trip was like no other. I and my wonderful sister Lynn, for part of the trip, traveled to Hungary to bring home my adopted daughter Esther, who had just turned 5. The people I met throughout my 6-week stay in Hungary were warm and kind and funny. They never realized how much they helped me and my daughter through such a rough and difficult time. My story is about some of them. Most adoptive parents in Hungary stayed in industrial towns and schools or churches and slept in bunk beds. We were so lucky. Our facilitator, Janos, got us a house in the wine country of beautiful Lake Balaton. My other lifesaver was my translator, Rita. She was just 18 years old, calm and funny and wise. The 3 of us traveled back and forth twice a day from my rented house to the orphanage way in the country. These were bonding times just for Esther and me. They never let my sister visit with Esther, just me. But toward the end of her stay, Lynn begged them to let her just have a peek, saying she would be quiet as a mouse. They let her come from the back of the playroom. She took one look at this adorable little girl smiling back at her and burst into tears and sobs. Lynn, stop, no. But I did understand, she couldn't help it. My translator Rita's fun-loving nature helped so much when things got emotional. She knew how to keep things a little bit light. One time, Rita and I were taking a walk along Lake Balaton when she saw 4 loud boys coming our way and who might not be too comfortable about my being an American. She said, look, I'll speak Hungarian and you just laugh at whatever I'm saying. Don't speak, just laugh. I did as she said. It worked. Hungary in 1991 was not much of a tourist destination. English was no one's second language. After Lynn had to go home and Rita's job took her to another family, my new savior was the overseas international telephone operator. I call and we just have little chats in English. Toward the end of my stay, while paperwork was being processed, Esty came to live with me at the house. Here she was, alone with a stranger. She would sit in the hallway and cry, and all my comforting would be for naught. I ended up in the hallway too, crying my eyes out in frustration. One day, Esther stopped crying and came over to me and pat on my back to comfort me. We sat there together, kind of lost. But our neighbors across the street came to our rescue. New saviors came into our life. We spent whole days with them. They played with Esther. We ate good Hungarian food and felt comforted being with the family. We finally got home to America. For the longest time, every weekend at my sister's house, where Esther was taken total care of by her 11-year-old wonderful cousin, Hetty. Hetty was her saving grace during those rough beginning times in Esther's brand new life. So I learned something. I learned a lot. I learned something about what is really bravery. Bravery is just following your heart. I guess I was, after all, a little bit brave. Wow.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you.
You are very brave in all of our eyes, truly, and I think you've done the bravest thing of all. Really. Thank you so much for sharing that story. I'm so glad Esty is in our lives. Thank you all for handling the technical glitches. Here's my ring. And that's, part of working with technology, but we persevere. Okay, so this is going to be a moment where we take a breath and stretch our bodies a little. Yeah, there we go. Because we're probably all sitting in a position for a certain amount of time, so let's just move, maybe hydrate a little, wine or water, whatever you want. And I'm also going to use this moment to shamelessly plug a workshop that I'm teaching in October, which I think is quite appropriate. It's called Spark Your Life Force, a breath and posture workshop. So if that sounds interesting to you, check it out on the Reflections website. Okay, do we all move around a little? I really need it. There we go, Denise. I like it. All right, so let's move on. See, it only takes a little bit of conscious movement to feel better, right? Okay, number 6. Our next storyteller is calling in from Buenos Aires, Argentina. Now, Ines is a vet to Storytelling Night because she shared at the last event too. And by the way, for those who heard her last story, oh, hold on, let me. There is some background noise. I just want to make sure that we're all muted. Hold on one moment before I continue. Okay. So those who were at the last storytelling event, you may want to know that her son is healthy and thriving and lives a beautiful life with his wife and 2 children. Ines is a Spanish-English translator and a teacher. She has been with her partner Luis for 25 years, and they share the love of travel with each other. As you will see from her story, Ines has been to some extraordinary places, and she looks forward to traveling again soon to experience the freedom, joy, and ease that she feels from exploring new lands. Ines, I feel you, and the mic is yours. Where is beautiful Ines? I've lost, hold on. Where is she? Oh no. Did she drop off? Oh no. Okay. Oh, there she is.
Can you hear me? I'm
Yes.
using Luis's phone because mine is coming on and off. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. I'm so glad you're here. Did you?
Yes. I'm sorry, but it was off for a while.
No worries. You're here now. We're ready for you.
Yes. Can you see me too? Yes.
Yes.
All right. This story is called Movies in a Cavern by the Sea. A magical ritual. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's a little choppy. I wonder if you shut off your video. Unfortunately, that
Okay, wait a minute. No,
Okay.
I know what is happening.
You
Now I
have the
have
other account
2.
open.
Yes,
have
I
to
have
shut
the
that
other
off.
one that opened alone. So I should shut it up. I'm sorry I'm delaying
It's
you.
okay. It's okay. We all have our chance to practice patience. We'll take it.
And I'm going to, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to come out of that meeting so that you can hear me here. Can you hear me?
Yes, much better.
Hello, can you
Yes.
hear me now? Much better.
Yes.
Okay, my story is called Movies in a Cavern by the Sea. So at the end of January 2006, my husband and I were lucky enough to travel and visit Lebu. We had never heard about that little fishing and mining town in the south of Chile, right at the Biobío region. Luis had been invited as a member of the jury at the Latin American Film Festival in Caverna Benavides, and I was totally determined not to miss the opportunity and go with him. We were indeed very intrigued about the reason why the festival had been named like that, with the name of a cavern. But once there, we rapidly learned that the huge 30-meter tall cavern next to the Pacific reached through a long and dark tunnel was one of the most important attractions in town. In the past, cavern had served as shelter and hideaway for one of the meanest and cruelest characters in America during colonial times. As the story goes, Benavides, a pirate, buried his looted booty in gold and silver in this cavern. And when he died, an earthquake hid the treasure forever and nobody could find it. In time, the town grew, getting stronger in fishing and mining. Its people are simple and hardworking. With the turn of the millennium, Miss Claudia Pino Saravia, born and raised in the region, came up with the idea of creating an annual event for the people in the area to be able to see films. There are no cinema theaters in Lebu. So during the week of the festival, it is the only month in the year in which the local population can all watch a movie. Projections are made in the cavern and they are absolutely magical. The sun sets late in that part of the world in summer. Before 10 p.m., the whole town, about 1,500 people, move to the cavern. Most of them walk the 3 kilometers that separate town and cavern, and they do it happily, carrying their deck chairs, blankets, as it can be very, very cold at night. They also take sandwiches, thermos bottles with hot beverages, which they share with friends and family. People of all ages, old, young, children, attend the films and ceremony in the cavern by the ocean. It is their only chance in the year to see a film. So when the sun finally sets and the projector is turned on, not a sound heard. They all watch and listen in respectful silence. Believe it or not, the festival's main sponsor, it is the only hardware store in town. It is called El Perro, Ferreteria El Perro. And they are in charge of providing electricity to the cavern, which they wire out from town. Apart from the jury, the actors, the actresses, filmmakers, TV and film producers gladly attend the festivals, and all the attendees stay in the only hotel in town, which is a wooden building from 1890. And it looks like 1890. Residents get crazily happy when they meet their favorite actors in the street. Imagine, or having a coffee in the only coffee shop round the corner. Every year, a short movie is planned and shot with the attending actors and the local people. The result is always hilarious and full of creativity, and it crowns the ceremony in the closing night. There are infinite details, apart from the ones already mentioned, that made this an unforgettable experience. Lebu is also placed in the Mapuche region, so being in the area, you can spy on ancestral Aboriginal customs. You may try millenary fish dishes. You may drink excellent wine. You can observe how they practice chueca, an old game played with a wooden stick and a ball, very similar to hockey today. And you may even join them in rituals, dancing and chanting. This was a memorable trip, and I will never forget neither the place nor the people I met.
Thank you, Inez. We did it. You made it through. Wonderful. What a story. What a story. It really makes me also miss going to the movies and appreciate like really how much we have in, you know, in where we live, and how special it must be for those people to see movies that one time a year. It's beautiful. Thank you so much for taking us there tonight. All right, let us continue. Our next speaker, Richard Anton Diaz, found his passion as a world traveler 40 years ago. His journey began as a professional ballroom dancer, where he and his then wife and partner, Bonnie, won both world and national titles. After retiring from his dance profession in 1999, he continued traveling the globe and is now in the process of establishing residency in Spain as a dual citizen. He lives in New York City and is certainly a man of many talents. He dove deep into the world of Chinese medicine and personal transformation. He has made it his mission to help others live a free and empowered life so that they can further better the world. It is an honor to have you here, Anton. The mic is yours.
Well, thank you, Hetty. And also kudos to you to just creating this beautiful platform to hear all these wonderful experiences of us youngins. So well done on that.
Such a pleasure.
So given my lifelong passion to world traveling, I'm hoping that you all appreciate that to pick a favorite one is close to impossible. But especially given that each of my travels are all like delicious foods, each having their own special, unique flavor and taste. But nevertheless, I will share with you the travel that most moved my heart and soul, but not without some brief highlights of some of my most memorable ones. As Hetty mentioned, I'm in the process of getting residency in Spain with the goal of acquiring a European passport by next year. My dream has always been to have dual citizenship in both Europe and United States. My last travel was actually to Spain just this past February. I was there to attend the annual Flamenco Festival being held in Jerez, located just below Sevilla. COVID was just beginning to bear its head, and I was hoping to squeeze 9 full, wonderful days in Spain before either New York City or Spain had any severe restrictions put in place. After 4 wonderful days going from bar to bar enjoying tapas and wine, and their wine is amazing, I love red wine, and while watching one incredible flamenco show after another, which they held at all the bars on the streets, I awoke in the middle of the 4th night in a haunting state of fear with an inner voice telling me, go back home now. That night, without going to sleep, I booked a new flight, and it was an added expense to my already paid round trip ticket in the middle of the night, and in 2 days, I was back at JFK. The news the next morning was that Spain was beginning to see cases and closed down New York, and New York City was on its way to becoming the epicenter, as you probably all know, of North America. But as Dorothy says in The Wizard of Oz, there's no place like home. So I was glad to be back home. I actually lived in Spain at the age of 21 in my last year of college in a study abroad program. I chose to stay in a southern village called Morón de la Frontera, known to be the greatest flamenco epicenter of guitarists in that area. Back then, Spain was still under the dictatorship of Franco, and the flamenco gypsy communities were very picky about any foreigners that they let into their inner circles. Unfortunately, I wasn't one of those inner circles candidates at work, but that was okay. There was actually a gypsy charm in the way they continuously pressed me to buy their absolutely worst guitars for hundreds of dollars. Of course, I always gracefully declined so as not to offend them. I did want to catch whatever brilliant sounds I could, so I remained in their graces. Ever since that stay in Spain, it's become a long-time desire for a second home place, and I never knew why. I just learned in my DNA, even though my parents were born in Latin America, that 65% of my genes are actually related to Spain. So I think I figured it out. So getting back to Spain, before heading back to the States to go back to college, I decided to visit Morocco to visit Marrakesh. Why Marrakesh? Well, all the other storytellers, well, okay, maybe not all of them, but some of you on this call were most likely hippies like me back then. And one of the songs we always got high to was the Marrakesh Express by Crosby, Stills, and Nash. So after the 2 days that I spent in Marrakesh, I traveled south and actually lived in a cave on a cliff that I climbed every day to get to, that overlooked the Atlantic Ocean in a small village called Mirleft. Now, Morocco is a whole other adventure that I look forward to sharing with you one day, but for the sake of time, let me fast forward. After finishing up college with a degree in fun, I quite by accident was offered a job at the Fred Astaire Dance Studio to teach social dancing. Little did I know that it would end up being a 20-year dance career that would feed into my lust for traveling by competing in world championships where I got to literally see a new part of Europe every year. My traveling passions continued to be fed after I retired from dancing into Asia, where I started working with a company in China as a distributor for organic medicinal mushrooms. And as Hedy had mentioned, I became certified in Taoist teachings. I taught Tai Chi and Qigong, as I still do. And to this day, I teach elemental traditional Chinese medicine. Now, as a side note, I believe China, which I've been to at least 3 times now, is easily the most politicized and propagandized country in the USA today. I predict that China will one day be the leading economy in the world due to its population, its landmass, and believe it or not, its undercurrent of the ancient wisdoms of Confucianism and Taoism that I believe will resurface one day in that country when we are in more peaceful times on our planet. Now, I know I'm close to my time, so I have to wrap it up, but let me say that there was one travel in particular that truly captured my heart and soul. One I made just 2 years ago in 2018, and just in time before the relations between our country began to sour with the Trump administration. And yep, another commie bad boy country that I seem to be attracted to, and of course, I'm talking about Cuba. The US government has limited travel to Cuba since 1960, after Fidel Castro came to power, and to this day, travel for tourist activities remain controlled largely due to a US fear of communism in China. But let me say, did I say China? In Cuba, sorry about that. When I landed in Havana, I was picked up by a taxi in a perfectly preserved 1959 Ford that I actually remember sitting as a child back in the States when I was a youngin'. And I'll never forget how the cars looked back then, because my sister and I would always sit in the back seat and look out the back window, and we would make the faces of the cars that were in back of us, because they all had faces, like they all had a certain mouth and they all had eyes, and we would always look at each other and make faces. And I remember certainly the face that we made with the 1959 Fords back there. But these were beautifully preserved cars in Cuba. I was driven to my Airbnb in Old Havana, and I arrived in a neighborhood that looked like a 1950s Hollywood movie set, the absolute most beautiful slums I have ever seen. There are so many things I can say about Cuba, like the sounds of the music in the streets, and from all the homes, no matter what time of the day and night, or the safety that you felt when walking even late at night through the alleys and never being afraid of being attacked. Cuba and crime in Cuba has severe, heavy penalties. So you can imagine those penalties in place make it very safe. But what moved me most, besides the art and music that literally flowed through the veins of Cuban people, was their color blindness. And what I mean by that was there was no black and white distinctions in Cuba. Only people, regardless of the color of their skin, who embraced one another as Cubans and as family. To experience such a natural integration of races in a poor but not depressed country for the first time was something I had never experienced in all my travels, especially in my home country of America. It was not only healing, but also enlightening. Anyway, to wrap it up, I've put some of my photos on my blog. You can go to www.richardantondiaz.com, and I'm going to be filling it up with all my other travels, especially the ones that I've done in Cuba and the ones that I continue to do. I want to thank you for your time. And Hetty, once again, thank you for creating this wonderful venue.
Ooh, thank you, Anton. I have so much to say to all of that. I feel like during each storytelling event, I always like nominate one person for like next president. And you're it.
I declined.
My last time.
I declined the job.
Well, thank you and the other thing I want to ask you, what is one of the faces you made with the car?
Oh, here is a Hudson.
There you go.
Hudson has a smile that goes down. And here is an Etzel. Which did not, the Etzels did not survive because they had that little grid that was in the middle. So they never survived as a car in fashion.
Good to know, but Etzel is in almost all my crosswords. So, you know, thank you, Anton. Really.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Great to hear from you. All right. What a journey we are continuing on. So our next storyteller, Phyllis Ruffer, was born in Long Island and currently resides in New York City and Connecticut. Her and her husband, Paul, are actually what I like to call my quarantine students. We met online in my class at the start of the pandemic madness. I can't wait for the day we could move and groove together in person, Phyllis. In Phyllis's past life, she was a real estate lawyer and a land conservationist. Now she's a happily retired lover of the arts and admirer of nature. I see all the beautiful photos we post on social media. Tonight, she shares a tale about something quite odd that happened on a trip to the Ukraine in 2007 when she went exploring her roots. Phyllis, the mic is yours.
Wow, Hetty, I had no idea you knew anything about me. So you gather information when you're not looking.
I've been spying on all the storytellers through the web. Like Anton was real tough because he's gonna like just so much to see. Phyllis, it was a pleasure spying on you.
Thank you. And Anton is a tough act to follow. I don't do faces.
Got this, girl.
But anyway, this story takes place in Ukraine, but it started with my father, who was born in Bessarabia. I say Bessarabia because it's a part of Eastern Europe where, depending upon what year you're born, the borders change. So my father was born in Russia. My grandfather was born in Russia. My father was born in Romania. And if you're born there today, you're born in Ukraine. So my father comes from a small town, not a village, but a little town, high up on a bluff overlooking a large river, and sited with an old Turkish fort, which if I move out of the way, you can all see a picture of. He came to the US when he was 6, and he had very romantic memories of this town, which was called Khatin. And I spent my whole childhood and afterwards wanting to go back there. My father died quite a while ago. He was 60. And I never realized the dream of going there with him. But I did do, I spent some time doing genealogy. I've been doing genealogy for the last 25 years. And I can trace my family back to the 1750s in this town. I knew where my father had lived. I knew where my grandfather's house was. So I thought, I'll go back to town and maybe I'll find some little piece of my father and some little piece of his family in Khatin. The town has about 11,000 people. The Jewish community is very small. There are about 30 people left there. And they're all older. They'd be great in storytelling because they're all well over 65. And I went there with a man who had done the genealogical research for me. He was our interpreter, and we had a driver and an interpreter, and we drove around Ukraine, and we ended up in the town of Khatin. I met people in the Jewish community. We met people outside the Jewish community. Nobody remembered our family or any of the families of my ancestors. And I couldn't find the address where my father had lived or the address of my grandfather's house, because my father lived there in the Romanian period. And in the Romanian period, the streets had different names. And if you could figure out what the current name of the street was, the street numbers had changed. So I really found out nothing about my family, which is very disappointing. But you know, we toured around the town and it was really beautiful. So we spent some time there, and one day someone said to me, you know, there's a very old man who lives in a nearby city. He probably knows your family. So his name was Solik. So we drove to this nearby city. It was about an hour away. And we went to the Chabad rabbi's house. Like, that never changes. The Chabad rabbi knows everything. And we were given the address of Mr. Solik. So we drove to his apartment building, and we're all excited. We're going to finally find a man who knew my family. And we get to the apartment building, and there's a big crowd of people outside. The mayor of the town, of the city, is there. There's a brass band, Ukrainian television, newspaper reporters, friends, family, a whole crowd. And we said, what's going on? He said, well, today is Solik's 100th birthday. We're here to celebrate. We're all going to go upstairs and have a party, and you should come along. And so we did. We went upstairs with the brass band and the newspaper reporters and the television cameras, and we found Solik and his wife sitting there in the living room, surrounded by well-wishers and cakes and cards and flowers. And we were interviewed on Ukrainian TV, and we ate lots of cakes and drank wine and laughed and had a grand time. Unfortunately, Solik did not remember anything about my family. So it was another dead end. But we had a good time, and we left, and we went back to the village of Khatin, or the town of Khatin. So the next day, we met one of the people who we had spent a lot of time with, and we said, you know, we went to Solik's house, and there was a brass band, and there was Ukrainian television, and we watched ourselves on TV last night, and it was really great, but unfortunately he didn't know anything about the family. And we said, oh well. And this lovely man looked at me, and he said, ah, and he raised one eyebrow, looking very much like Mr. Spock. And he said, ah, Solik, let me tell you something about Solik. When we came back to Khatin after the war, the Soviets were drafting men of army age to serve in the Soviet army, and Solik didn't want to go. So he added 15 years to his age. And guess what? Solik's not 100 years old. He's only 85. So, but he's been living this lie ever since the war. And we never found anything out about my family. And as far as I know, Solik is living happily. They think he's 115 years old now. And that's the end of my story.
That's great, Phyllis. That's great. You know, I always said, like, why not just tell people that we're older than we are? Because then they'll be like, wow, you look so young.
You're so well preserved.
So I'm 120. Thank you, Phyllis. That was a fabulous story. So interesting. Must have been really just wonderful to travel there.
Yeah, it's really
just
interesting.
To know that that's where, you know, your father was at some point. So thank you for sharing. Okay, so we have two more stories, and we may go a little bit over time. So I hope you guys can hang in there. Virginia Atkins was born in Boston and moved to upstate New York when she was 5 years old. She studied education, both grad and undergrad, and then became very involved in the women's movement. This led her to get an MBA at NYU. The first job she got with her business degree sent her traveling around the world. However, in her retirement, pleasure became her main reason for travel. Some of her favorite places to explore are those where she gets to practice her Spanish. Her story tonight takes place in 1967. She shares a not so beautiful incident that happened on the very beautiful beaches of Nice, France. Virginia, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Hetty. I hope everyone can hear me.
We can.
As Hetty said, my story takes place in 1967. At the end of my first year of teaching, before I made decisions about what next in my life, because I was weighing, should I go to Europe or should I go to graduate school? And my older sister had gone to Europe after finishing her education, and she came home 2 years later with a husband. So my parents were not crazy about the idea of my going to Europe. So my mother came up with an idea to send me, along with my younger sister, on a whirlwind trip to Europe, for one of those trips that was very common in the 60s, where you hopped on a bus and went to a dozen countries in a fixed period of time. There were lots of young people on the trip, and also a lot of people who were my age back then. So the group was split pretty evenly between new grads, young people, and olders. We had, as our tour guide, what I would call a forceful, overbearing, opinionated, proud, arrogant, intimidating man. He was probably twice my age, and was really, I think, very difficult to get along with, but that issue aside. We managed to plow our way across Europe and ended up towards the end of the time in Nice. And we had all packed our bathing suits with the promise of being able to dip in the Mediterranean. Because our daytimes were very crowded with group activities and planned visits to historical and sites and so forth, we found ourselves in need of going swimming after dark, after dinner at night. So we asked the tour guide where and when was a good time to go swimming. And he suggested to us after dinner at the far end of the beach, away from the what is the public area where people swim during the day, which was probably about a 15 or 20-minute walk from the normal swimming part of the place where people went swimming during the day. So all the young men and women in the tour hiked down the street, down the road to the beach that he directed us to. And when we got there, I was the first person into the water because I was really keen on getting myself into the Mediterranean. And I quickly realized that the water was slimy. And that, in fact, I was standing in sludge. He had sent us to swim in a sewage outlet. It was a pretty horrifying experience, as you can imagine. One of the things I did do as a consequence of having experienced this was pick up a piece of trash off the beach, which I still have, and sits prominently on one of the tables in my living room. It's essentially a ceramic tile that I think was probably part of the sewage system at the time. When we reported to the guide that we had been swimming, and I think he was not the least bit remorseful. He may have been a little surprised because I think he probably realized that what he had orchestrated was not the smartest thing he's ever done in his career. But I think for me, it was my very first exposure to an important life lesson. And that is that people in positions of power don't always have my best interest at heart. So that's my brief story for the evening.
Virginia. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm so sorry that happened in your life. You know, it's
okay. It's a good lesson.
And you learned the lesson, you know, like this could have been also a great story at the lessons learned storytelling event because of, you know, the travel is great, but the lesson learned was really profound. So thank you for sharing that with all of us. I'm sure a lot of people resonate to that lesson too. So thank you. All right, everybody, here we go. We have one more amazing storyteller for the night, Marcella Smith. Marcella grew up in a small town in Michigan and currently splits her time between her apartment in New York City and her house in the Berkshires. She has worked in book selling and publishing and still does some consulting. She is a longtime student of Reflections and has been married for 25 years. I am honored you're with us tonight. You're an inspiration to all who know you, Marcella. The mic is yours. There's Marcella. Okay, just make sure to unmute yourself. And you got it. There we go.
Well, thanks, Hetty, for that great invitation and for including me in this gathering. It's really been what a fabulous night of amazing stories from a wonderful, charming, absolutely remarkable collection of storytellers and people who have had really remarkable experiences, I have to say. It's just such a pleasure to enjoy these storytelling sessions. I just think they're just great. I love it. I love it.
We love you.
It also seems like there's something in common with what was going to be my lead-in to my story, which was that all of your storytellers have followed their heart. They followed what called them, and that's how they came to have the lives that they have had and the people they have married and where they live and how they live their lives and have always lived their lives. And I take that to heart because that's what I did with my life. I grew up, as you said, in a very small town in Michigan. And I knew by the time I was, I think maybe 12 or 13, that a small town life where I grew up was not for me. And the minute that I could leave there, I surely did. So I went to school, I went to college in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I was there actually, graduated in 1970, the year of the Kent State shootings, and was on the campus when that all happened. And when the National Guard moved in and all kinds of things happened at the U of M. But anyway, what I wanted to do was to end up in New York, but I knew that because I'd grown up in this small, essentially farm town. I worked in a pig farm when I was in high school to earn, money instead of babysitting because I was a horrible babysitter. But, but anyway, I wanted to go to New York, but because I knew I wasn't quite ready for that, I thought after I graduated from college, I should move to a larger city, but not that city. So I applied for jobs in publishing in Chicago and Boston and Washington, DC. And I got a job with a publisher in Washington, DC in 1970, and I moved there. And what was great about my life in Washington, DC in those days was that I was there for Watergate. So the Watergate incident and the trials were it wasn't just the national news, it was the local news. Living on Capitol Hill, I could walk out at night and sit on the steps of the Supreme Court and look down the mall. And it was a great, great experience. But I still wanted to be in New York City. So I worked for a book-selling company, Brentanos, which is no longer around. And anyway, I got promoted to New York City. And so at long last, I was where I wanted to be. And it was that desire to see and experience all these different cultures around the world and all the things that I'd read about in the New Yorker and every place else, New York and London and Paris and Africa and Italy. And I've been fortunate enough to go to all of those places and experience the wonders that they offer. So my first real great journey abroad was in 1988. A really good friend of mine planned a safari to Kenya, and it inspired me to take up my study of photography. And I bought my first SLR camera to use on that trip, and the slides were the travel photo means of choice. So when I got back, of course, I had to do a slideshow for all my friends. But the really important thing that happened on that trip that I wanted to share with everyone when I came back was that one morning we went out on a game drive, and it was early, just after dawn, and we saw a lioness kill a gazelle right in front of us. And that night, when we came back for tea, which would have been in the late afternoon, we drove by that same spot we had seen in the morning, and there was not a trace of the gazelle left. nothing, no bone, no ear, no hair, no eyeball, no nothing left. And from my perspective, nature is the best recycler in the world if you give it a chance to do its job. The other great experience I had was we came back late one afternoon from another game drive. And when we came back from our late afternoon game drives, there was always tea being prepared for us. So while I was waiting for the tea, and we were in Kenya, I was standing just on the ground with my feet on the ground, just sort of absorbing the day and what we had seen and looking around and just feeling where we were. And I felt that this, like Richard Leakey had said, that this was the place where man was born. And I had that intense feeling that this indeed was where life as we have come to know it and understand how humans have evolved on this planet, that indeed was the place. It was just a remarkable, moving experience. And it's drawn me back to Africa several times since then, that feeling of being in just one of the most remarkable places on the earth, for all of its challenges and troubles and challenges. The physicality of Africa is just moving and extraordinary. I had wanted to go to Victoria Falls on that trip, but it just wasn't enough time on that itinerary, and I was still working, and so I would have to do it another time. But it remained on my bucket list. And in 2007, for my 60th birthday, I went to Africa again. And this time I did it up right. I visited a tea plantation in Malawi. I stayed in a game lodge in Botswana, and I spent a night at the Hotel Livingston with cocktails on the Zambezi River. And the next morning, thanks to some friends we had met on safari who suggested that we eat breakfast on an island in the Zambezi River, we said, sure, why not? So we made our reservations and we went. And we had no idea. We just thought we were taking a little boat ride to this island in the middle of the river, and we were gonna have a lovely, charming English breakfast in the middle of the Zambezi River. Little did we know that along with that went a walk out into the river to the edge of Victoria Falls, where we could actually stand on the edge of the falls and look down into the cavern, into the valley where the falls drop. And it was just the most remarkable, jaw-dropping thing. I will remember that moment, see it in my mind's eye till the day I fall over. I mean, it was just, partially because it was such a surprise. I mean, it was just so unexpected. I mean, everything on that trip sort of had that quality of being unexpected, surprises everywhere, but that just really, took the cake. And no matter how old I get, I will never, ever forget that, that experience. It was really remarkable. But the other thing that I had always wanted to do in my life after Victoria Falls was go to Italy. And so every summer for years before, even before I went to Victoria Falls, I would say to my friends, doesn't somebody want to go to Italy? Let's go to Italy this summer. Come on, doesn't somebody want to go? If you don't want to go this year, let's go next year. Come on, doesn't somebody want to go to Italy? And there was always, oh, my cousin's getting married. My brother's graduated from college. My father wants us to do blah, blah, blah. And so finally, I was still taking photography courses. And so finally, one summer, I got a mail letter from one of my photography teachers who said he was taking a bunch of photographers to Italy for a photography course. And I said, I'm in. I don't care about the rest of you. I am going to Italy. And so I did. And I got to see Siena and Florence and Venice, which is another place near and dear to my heart, at the top of my list to live every time. And since then, I've been to South Africa, Chile, New Zealand, and Australia. I love New Zealand. I'd move there in a minute if they would let me, but Venice is still right up there at the top of my list. But back to that first trip to Italy. It remains the most memorable of all of my travels, because it was there I met the love of my life. And 24 years later, we are still together.
Yay. Marcella, thank you. Is Linda there listening with you?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. Hi. Woo. I love, hi, Linda. love how you just circled everything back to the magic and mystery of travel, like stepping right outside the comfort zone and there it is. So thank you for bringing that to life in your story. Oh my goodness, everybody. We did it, 10 stories. I am just in awe of all of our speakers and blown away by the stories we've heard. And so very grateful for all of you that have shown up wholeheartedly to hear these special stories. The next storytelling event will be in November. More details to come, but if this kind of sparked your interest in sharing, definitely reach out as soon as the details are put out there, and do check out Reflections. Taking care of your body, mind, and spirit is not a luxury. It is a necessity, especially in the times we're living in. So check it out, and thank you all so much for being here tonight.
Thank you,
Until
Hetty.
next time. Yeah, you're welcome to unmute yourself and let me hear your voice if you'd